We are all of the opinion, my dear General, that some things must be attempted to revive our expiring credit, give our cause some degree of reputation, and prevent total depreciation of the continental money, which is coming very fast. Even a failure cannot be more fatal than to remain in our present situation. In short, some enterprise must be undertaken in our present circumstances, or we must give up the cause.
Welcome to the Instinctive Influencers podcast, a show where influence becomes one of your tools for success. Now, here are your hosts, Brian Weber and Ed Haley.
Hi, I'm Brian.
And I am Ed.
And this is the Instinctive Influencers podcast. We thank you so much for joining us today. Ed, we are getting into a amazing topic that we've tried to record not once, not twice, but now the third time. Yeah, luck be the lady today. But with that, man, before we get too deep into it, because we're basically going to cover leadership lessons and some of that area of Washington that we both are very proud of. You got a new bike this week. You sent me a picture of it. You want to tell us about your cool new bicycle?
I did get me a Ghost Treyu e-bike, so I can cheat. I got a nice mountain bike that my wife and I ordered in April. Yep, I know it's January. We ordered it in April, and she still didn't get hers. So I'm pretty excited. I just need the weather to change because I'm a little soft when it comes to the cold, and if it's not over 40, I'm not going outside to do anything really. So
yeah, hey, you're speaking to the choir, my friend. I am a fair weather individual. If it's under 48, I don't ride. If it's in the 20s, I don't run. So
the 20s. Oh, you're generous. Ooh.
No, I mean I can do in the 30s as long as the windshield factor isn't in there. I got a Peloton right in front of me here. I can jump on that just as easy. Get my sweat on. So you get this e-bike, man. Is it to kind of help you get up some of those mountainous hills?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things. Here, there's so many trails everywhere, and you'll see this trail and you'll be like, wow, I really want to ride that. And you're like, but look at that hill. Ooh. Like so and then there's another thing I want to do, and hopefully they still have it given the current, pandemic situation. They do this the MWR, the Morale Welfare Recreation for the military, does this ride every year along the Rhine River. And basically you ride for a few hours each day over a 4-day weekend, and you stop at hotels along the way, and then they just bust you back at the end of it with your bike. So you and your bike and whatever you carry.
That sounds awesome, man.
I know it sounds cool.
Just to get out there and I would enjoy that. I would.
Yeah. So.
All right. So we're gonna get into this topic because I think it's been long overdue. We've got to talk about it. And this is leadership lessons from crossing the Delaware. We actually pulled this article. This is an article we found on Forbes.com. So it was pretty cool. It's funny how you can find material in the strangest of places. I've been doing all kinds of searches, man, for all different types of leadership lessons because I really like the idea of building on this. However, I would say that there's a lot more to the story than what we're going to get into from this. So I would recommend people to check it out. But I did want to give like a little bit of a history in a narrative form about what we're looking at this particular scene before we jump into those 5 lessons. And we're going to hit those 5 lessons in it. But here we go. The winter of 1776 was a miserable one. The wet and frozen ground over which the ill-equipped men of America's army marched left summer as distant memory. Washington's troops were mostly made up of farmers, merchants, and laborers, not professional soldiers. Even his generals were novices. Many, like Nathaniel Greene of Rhode Island, had no military experience at all. Even Washington himself had only experienced combat as a British militia commander during the French and Indian War, which had ended 13 years before. Throughout 1776, the American army had suffered defeat after defeat. Hungry, exhausted, defeated, and demoralized, the army trudged through the frozen Pennsylvania countryside. Adding to Washington's difficulties was the fact that the government of the new nation he represented was destitute. The new Congress could not provide money or basic supplies for his troops. The soldiers originally enlists were ending, and many more were deserting in hopes of receiving pardons from the British. The cause of independence stood on a knife's edge. The burden of saving the burden of saving it fell to Washington. The pressure on him personally and professionally were immense. Doubts were certainly at the forefront of his mind, but Washington knew he had to act. Washington's experience as a militia commander taught him how to command a volunteer army. Good morale and hope were essential to its survival as arms and munitions. Supplies were tough to obtain. Washington wrote pleading letters to Congress, begging for reinforcements, for supplies, for money to pay for his troops. Not any support the former colonies could provide. Maintaining hope would take courage. All right, so I want to leave it to that for right now. So we have a general idea. Washington's in this point right now, right? He is basically at his wit's end. He has no support from the Continental Congress, right? He's got this army that he has to push through the different battles. They're getting beat up. They're losing soldiers, not only from, being killed, but they're losing soldiers who are deserting. Those whose enlistments are ending. We're looking at a multitude of problems, and he has to figure it out. I wrote a paper, Ed, not too long ago. Actually, I'm in the Department of Professional Studies, and in this, you actually have to do a history paper. And I'll send you my history paper, man. I did it on, I call it Washington's Push, and I did the entire paper on crossing Delaware. And I wrote the paper after we had already tried to record this episode twice, right? And the things that you find out through research, and then you start understanding, is Washington actually, it was on him. The revolution, to actually win, was completely on him. It was almost like I almost felt as if though the Continental Congress, they were just kind of like there, but they weren't there. They were like, all right, yeah, you can do it, but then they didn't show up. And when I say show up, I don't mean to war. I mean like backing him somehow, finding finances, finding supplies. Instead, Washington had to do that, and he had to rely on some really, really good individuals, which we're going to talk about some here. Let me get, before we dive into these leadership lessons, because we have 5 of them, let me get some thoughts from you with this entire scenario.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are very key here too. So the Continental Congress at this time is not in the capital of Philadelphia, because the British has pushed them into Baltimore, right? So they're gone. They're backed up. George Washington has lost New York. He's lost New Jersey. He is continuously retreating. So now what's happened is, he doesn't know it, but in Baltimore, there's an appetite for his removal. So that discussion is being had as he comes upon, as he gets closer to this moment in his life that will change a lot. With crossing, 300, I think it's 300 yards where he crosses that, but it's the conditions and those things. And you can even hear, and so we open with a quote from Colonel Joseph Reed. Just want to make sure we give him that credit. But in it, he's basically saying like, hey, like, we need to do something, and it needs to be drastic, or we should just give up what we're doing. And they know that the price for what they've done, because it's treason, is death. So they're backed against, like, we have to fight, and we need to do something really drastic right now. And Washington is looking for that great victory. Maybe not, he may be not thinking, I need a great victory. But from now, knowing what we know, he's looking for that great moment, that great victory that makes him this larger than life person. Because at this point, he hasn't had it, you know.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I don't want to. I would never compare war to a sport. Okay, but you can do like similarities and stuff. And the way I see this, right? I see like Continental Congress and all that. Basically the figureheads. They're like the front offices of an NFL team, right? They're just there. They're providing what they can. But I would say the front offices actually provide more than what the Continental Congress was given. And Washington's the head coach. That's what he is. He's the head coach. He's the one making the plays. He's out there. He's setting up the plays. He's doing everything. He's got his players, but he doesn't have a stellar team, right? He's not. He doesn't have a Tom Brady at quarterback. He doesn't have an Odell Beckham Jr. He doesn't have a Nick Chubb running back. You know what I mean? Hey, listen, just deal with it, okay?
We're working through it.
Yeah, but he doesn't have stars. He has average Joe. That's what he has, and he's got to win games. And if he doesn't win, he's on this losing track, right? So his season started off, with a losing track, and they've lost, and they lost, and they lost. And it's like, oh, hey, maybe we got to look at, replacing our head coach. Maybe we got to look at, getting a new one in here who may be able to do this. Or maybe we need to look at dissolving the team, in a sense. That's what I'm getting from it, right? I see that's what it looks like. But then he makes this decision. Hey, we're going to attack. We're going to attack the Haitians. And I know you'll talk about the Haitians in a moment, probably. But we're going to do it when the most unexpected time, right? So if anybody knows anything about history and they understand about war during that time period, in the wintertime, in most cases, the wintertime was when the least amount of battles took place. They literally would just stand to. They would close up shop for the winter. And then come back out in the spring. And it would end roughly around the beginning of December, middle of December, and then they wouldn't pick back up fighting like heavily. Like you may have small skirmishes here and there, but you're not going to have any major battles.
Yeah. Fighting season.
Yeah, basically, and that's what it was. It was fighting season. So here we are. We're supposed to be holding back, and George's like, no, we ain't doing that. No, we're going to go get them. We're going to go in. We need to do this. We can use this, the surprise element. We're going to cross over where they didn't think we would ever do. And there's a lot of things that, I wrote this in my paper. There's a lot of things that weighed heavy. There were people telling the British and the British's Haitian soldiers, hey, he's coming across. He's coming to attack you here.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, nah, it ain't happening. He doesn't have that, right? Well, we're gonna see. You want to start us off with number one, man? The first, our first leadership lesson here.
I am so thankful for you giving me number one because I really like this one. So the first leadership lesson is heroes exist in the unlikeliest of places. And so for this, Brian, going right off script here. So the hero here that they really focus on is Henry Knox, right? So Henry Knox he goes and he retrieves some artillery for General Washington, and he plays such a key role in the New York. In the whoops,
Siri's trying to help you.
Trying to help me out. Yeah, Siri's trying to help me with the episode. So anyway, so Knox actually goes and he gets a bunch of artillery pieces that they left behind when they were retreating. And these end up helping to turn the tide. And during the New York, New Jersey campaign, he is one of the guys. But here's the thing, right? When we say heroes in unlikely places, I mean, prior to this, Henry Knox was a bookstore owner. Like he wasn't, General Washington's classmate. He was just this average Joe doing average things before this. So that's really important to know. And then, he participated in a lot of major engagements with Washington around New York City. He was almost captured in the Battle of Manhattan. and he actually gets away with some assistance from Aaron Burr, who is another key figure in American history. So, this is one of those cases, like if you say, oh, that bookstore owner is going to, play a role in the United States being formed, no, nobody would ever believe that was the case. But here's this guy, and he does it.
Yeah, insane. It's heroes in the likeliest places. So how can we see this as a lesson learned and then utilize this within our organization? Well, your heroes in the most likeliest places, it could be those influential leaders that you have that are not formal leaders. They're not in a formal leadership position, right?
Absolutely.
So that's noticing those individuals, those people who can take the reins and run with it, that you can trust to do that. They show competence. And that's what Henry Knox did. He showed a level of competence for the things they they got to get these large artillery cannons across on these rather large boats. People are often confused. You see the picture, the painting done, the famous picture done of him crossing with just a few people in the boat. That was not the type of boat that was being crossed with. Okay. No. What we had to focus on is they were much larger boats. And often these were the type of boats that would carry livestock and just heavy, large items. So they were really bigger boats. And one of the key facts too is what they did is, and this kind of brings me a little pride for my home state, is they brought a lot of the New Englanders from Maine and stuff like that who are used to like really rough waters. They came down and they're the ones who piloted those boats across. So, but for Henry Knox to figure out this whole getting the artillery pieces across, that was a big thing. You're talking about a non-professional soldier, a bookstore owner. He maybe he read something about it, So I guess that goes to show, Ed, that reading does help. Doesn't matter.
I mean, yeah. And so when it talks about in the article that we're referencing, the very last blurb of this article is so interesting to me. Like eagles, leaders don't flock together. You must often find them one at a time, and sometimes a bookseller helps you win a war. And I think that's so, it's so important to understand that, don't underestimate that person's capabilities just because they're in a position where maybe that position's not challenging them enough and they're not showing their full potential. But there's more underneath, Maybe they're great. Let's talk about, our guy that we have in common. Maybe he's great in an office scenario, but maybe he's even better outside of that office working and managing more people. But we don't know that because he just stays in the office. He doesn't leave his office scenario, right? So he's managing 2 or 3 people, but he really would be great at managing 20. He just doesn't know it yet. So you can't overlook those things when you're looking at people in your organization. Just understand, I don't know their full potential. Yeah. I don't know everything they have to offer yet. Maybe there's something there. And that comes to, Brian, about, you and I have talked about talking to people, getting to know people in your organization, because then you're going to pick up on cues that, oh, Brian, I didn't know you used to be a facilitator at a schoolhouse. I would have never thought you were good at that, and you got young Sergeant Weber, and you're like, I'd like you to be my equal opportunity guy and teach these classes then, and we can use those skills. Now I just made the organization better because I tapped into something that you have a skill of that maybe in your day-to-day you're not showing me, but by having discussions with you, I've learned it now, and we can, make our organization better.
Exactly. All right. Before I jump into the next one, and I just want to say, hey, so the takeaway from that very first one of heroes exist in the most unlikeliest of places is don't underestimate the power of the people. Don't, because you don't know where your next leader's coming from. And I think if there's somebody out there who's listening to this and they're a junior leader, wherever they're at, hey, help reinforce, those leadership traits. If a senior leader's listening to this, hey, don't shut people down. Instead, build them up, because really your job is for them to take your job. We've said it 100 times.
100 times. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good point, Brian.
So I'm going to get into the next one. It's called Hold Steady in the Face of the Butts of the Butt Sirs.
But sir.
Yeah, before I get into that though, I want to read this part real quick. Washington decided to attack at night, using the darkness to mask his movements and surprise the British encamped at Trenton. Although the darkness would improve the chances of surprise, it also added a challenge to what was already a daunting task. If he were able to concentrate his men successfully and lead them across the ice-choked river, he would need to then lead them into combat. This fight would not be against British regulars, however, but against British Hessian mercenaries in the service of the English king. These Hessian troops were from central Germany and were renowned for their extremely effective discipline and vast experience. Facing these soldiers was a truly intimidating, prospect for the young and exhausted force of laborers and farmers and the general commanding them. So here we go.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we're setting up this idea as hey, this is going to be tough, and before I get into the number 2 one there, how many times do we face something in our workplace? How many times do we face something, just in life, and we're like, man, this is just going to be tough. Like we're telling ourselves how tough it is. We're basically trying to defeat ourselves before it's over, right?
Yeah, the unknown, fear of the unknown.
It'll get a hold of you.
Yeah. So real quick, Brian, so you talk about the Hessian troops. So there's a couple of things. So one thing is it was widely believed at one point that the Hessians had partied all night because it's Christmas, right? And
That's
so
true.
that they were in such a state that it made it a little easier for them to be surprised. But this is not the case. The case is that the locals in Trenton, right, had formed these little like militias, and they had been harassing. And so that
Really?
what was his name? Colonel Raw, who is the leader of the Hessian forces around Trenton, he actually has his men, and they're in a high state of awareness for days on end leading up to this attack. So it's more a case of they're exhausted, right? And you start to become complacent with that, becoming as you become tired.
Yeah.
So when George and the boys get there, these guys are like, they are prime, but it's not because they lack discipline and were drunk. And that goes back to you saying how these guys were super, they were known to be well-disciplined mercenaries. So I just wanted to add that kind of to the discussion.
We could almost make another lesson learned from that right there. That's that, to me, Ed, that's that whole, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And then basically he's making everything a priority. He's wearing them out. He's creating burnout. We've done a show on burnout. So go back to the archives and listen to that. But basically that's what he's doing to his forces, which Washington doesn't know this. He's going into this blindly, in a sense. I mean, he has his spies and stuff like that, but I don't think he really understands that part of it.
And then, so also, last point, I promise, is that so Colonel Raw also believed like nobody's coming across that river. So it's okay to let our guard down, towards the river. Nobody's coming across that in this storm. That's ludicrous.
Yeah.
Well, there's one guy.
Yeah.
Who was told by his adjutant, we got to do something drastic. So there was one guy, and this crossing the Delaware is that drastic move. So what you got, Brian?
So hold steady in the face of the butt, sirs. I started off reading about how tough this is, what they're facing. And it's because it was to set up this next leadership lesson, which is once Washington made his decision to cross the Delaware and attack, he never wavered. As soon as the order was disseminated through the ranks, leaders were hit with a barrage of but sirs. But sir, the river filled with ice. But sir, these boats weren't designed to transport cannons. But sir, my men haven't eaten in 3 days. They won't survive the march. But sir, the British are well resisted and well fed. What chance do we have in battle? I mean, I could have done it in but sir,
But sir.
one of those types of voices, right? So here we go. But sir, but sir, but sir. As a leader, how often do you deal with resistance to a tough decision? Washington responded by increasing the level of communication so that everyone had better understanding of his decisions, as illustrated in the brief aside to his officers. If we do not win soon, there will be no army left. When there is no army left, the rebellion will be over. When the rebellion is over, we will all be hung. Therefore, we have little to lose. So basically, what's going on here is Washington is giving them, this is what's going to happen. If we don't do this, we're all fired. If you think about it, right? We're all losing our job. And oh, by the way, we're probably going to die too, because they're going to hang us. We're what they're fighting against. They're not going to like it. They're going to set an example of us. Let's think about this in the football realm, Ed.
All right.
That's the speech to the coaches. That's that. Hey, if we don't win, we're all losing our jobs. We're all going to get fired. They're going to look for a new head coach. They're going to need a new quarterback. They're going to need a new running back. They're not going to keep us if we keep losing, right? And that's, I mean, well, I hate to bring this up, but the Washington football team, they may want to look at a lot of stuff.
New name pending.
Yeah, new name pending, because they're one of those organizations that they probably have a lot of butt sirs going on, and well, some of them are pretty bad. Poop water coming everywhere, scissors on the field, multiple injuries in one little specific spot of the field. Yeah. Anyways, let me digress. So, but with this, man, if you think about it, as leaders, we're going to make a decision, and we're going to receive what is called a resistance to change, right?
Yeah.
They're going to try to resist us and try to, hold on, we got to think about this. But we already thought about it. We already did the planning. We already did the strategic planning. We've already decided we've resourced it. We need to move forward. And that's the key part, is to be able to say, hey, listen, as a leader, tell them the why. Tell them it's okay. That's what, when you get a bunch of but sirs or but ma'am or hey, but boss, tell them why we're doing this. If it is a stupid reason, then you stop, right? You think about it. All right, is it really a good reason why I made this decision? However, if it's to keep the organization going, then that's what we do. We keep going. We don't stop because we get a bunch of naysayers. And that's going to happen. It's going to happen time and time again. And, I seen it. I seen it at my last organization where people were like, no, we can't, our organization's too big. We can't take everybody to the field. Want to bet? I've done it before. We can do it again. Right. I did it under my mentor when he said, we're all going. I was like, okay, let's see how this works out, because I trusted him.
Yeah.
And I was getting myself and my previous commander, Blair Anthony, love the guy to death. Same thing. We were getting the same but sirs or but first sergeants, and like, no, you're giving us hopeless, unvalid excuses. How do we move on from those? So, but that's kind of my soapbox on the but sir. I think we just got to move forward on Ed. Where do you take it?
Yeah, so I see it kind of like that too. Like it is but I was thinking more, we've talked a few times about the come to me with a problem and a solution. Yes, sir. Here's the issue, but here's how I see that we could fix it. Maybe it's a delay, whatever it is. And for this crossing, I mean, to me, there were so many opportunities to say, but sir. And the way I see it is, that's what makes this crossing even more epic, is that they overcame those but sirs and they continued mission anyway, right? Like they continued to push because, I mean, they're 3 hours behind the original timeline. When they land, when they land on the other side of the river, he intended on being ready to attack by then. Sorry. Yes, because he wanted to fight in the night. And so but he didn't say, "Oh, you know what? We're too delayed. Let's stop." And I'm sure it wasn't a matter of him just saying, "Nope, we're going." I'm sure he's like, "Okay, if we continue on, here's the hazards. Here's the things that could happen because of that. You know, let's weigh the risk versus the reward." I'm sure it was a lot of decision making, not based off of what we call the military decision making process now, but I'm sure they had something. Whether it may be just him internally, right? Because it was a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
more not as decentralized command back then. So maybe it was just George running it through his head and going, no, no, it's worth the risk. We have to go or we're going to be tried for treason. So let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a good way to overcome the but sirs, Brian.
So excuse me, goodness. You mentioned not so much the decentralized command. However, I would say this: he had 3 different units or 3 different groups that they were trying to cross at once, right?
Absolutely.
And they were all in 3 different locations, so it's not like they had like this great communication back and forth. Hey, I'm going, you going? Yeah, okay. You going? Yeah, yeah. No, they didn't have radios to say, all right, time, move now, let's go. ETA,
Yeah,
blah, blah,
Charlie
blah.
Mike.
Yeah, Charlie Mike out. Yeah, no, this is what happened. There was a plan. It was sent out, right?
Yeah.
So let's think about it. We just did the show on Mission Command. We talked about commander's intent. We've got it. We know, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, basically, when we talk about communicating vision. So we have the commander's intent.
Yep.
They receive their mission orders. And now you've got discipline. We talk about discipline initiative. And then also we talked about risk acceptance. All right. What happens? Those other 2 units Washington was supposed to cross with, they didn't cross because they said, I can't accept this risk. We can't get across. They took discipline initiative. Now, there's not a lot reported on how Washington felt about this, about those other units not making it. However, he still fulfilled his portion of it, and he still got across. Before we get into this frequently communicating the vision, I want to cover another little area.
All righty.
I've got this great narrative about the whole crossing and the choice of crossing it. I would tell you that if anybody really wants to, really understand, like really fulfill, like just understand it, and they're as interested in this type of stuff as us, because I love just looking up like some of these. You learn so much from history. You learn so much, like you can apply, and you're talking a time where there was no technology, horses, cannons, boats, ice.
Ice. Those things just don't sound like they go together.
You know what I'm saying? Starvation,
horses, cannons, ice.
Yeah, starvation, bare feet for some because they didn't have the right equipment. So you name it, man.
Yep.
To me, that those were soldiers. I mean, they may have been farmers and bookstore salesmen. Those, to me, those were soldiers. They turned into soldiers. All right, so here we go. The troops were drummed out of camp at 2 p.m. on December 25th, and the mission was on. As the men marched down toward the river, the wind picked up, and rain started to fall. The men struggled to load cannon, horses, and themselves into the slab-sided boats that would take them across the river. As the evening wore on, darkness settled in, and the weather continued to worsen, changing to snow and hail with strong cold winds, freezing the wet men and equipment. The weather got so bad, 2 parts of the army to the south were forced back from the river, unable to cross. See what I'm talking about? They couldn't cross. If Washington were to lose courage and call off the attack, now would be the time. So we're going to get into the next one, number 3, Ed. Tell us how that right there, if Washington were call it off, now is the time.
Now is the time. Well, first of all, Ryan, the original vision, Brian, it was 3-pronged, right? So we keep talking about these other 2. General Ewing was supposed to cross near Trenton Ferry, and he was going to block the Hessians from being able to retreat out of there. And then you also had Colonel Caldwaller, and he was just going to be like a diversionary crossing at a place called Bordentown. So you had these other people. So this is the full vision, right? You're going to stop them from retreating. You're going to be the diversion, and we're going to be the main line of effort. And we're going to get over there, and we are going to we're going to start this march by midnight, and all these things. And then Murphy showed up, right? Murphy's Law, and he damaged the vision. He damaged the vision, but the overall vision is still there. So Washington didn't say it just once. He repeated himself over and over, up and down the line of soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
The vision: cross the river, move the artillery, cross Jacobs Creek, 12 hours. Did everyone agree with that plan? Probably not, right? Did they execute the mission? Well, we know they executed the mission. And I think it's an understanding of a vision that lets you say, okay, yeah, we're behind, but let's keep pushing forward. Yeah, General Ewing didn't get to cross, but let's push forward. Is this a catastrophic failure, him not crossing? No, we can still accomplish the good general's vision. And we're going to get into, in point 4, how that vision still gets accomplished, right? How
Absolutely.
we know he's still all in too. Because you got to know that General Washington is still all in as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to it, but they understood the vision and understanding that. And I remember being a young private, and you'd go out to these field training exercises, and I remember them saying, well, who's the enemy? And I was like, I don't know. We're just out here in the woods of Fort Drum, New York, right?
Yeah.
But they developed these scenarios, and I never understood. Like, I'm just a private. I'm here digging this hole. Why do I need to know that? And now, 24 years later, plus, I understand it, because you want the lowest possible person to understand it.
Yep,
and I know you haven't, and you haven't had the opportunity to spend some time at the National Training Center in beautiful Fort Irwin, California. But I can tell you one thing they will do in a heartbeat. The guys who are in charge, who kind of control the training, they will absolutely take a squad leader and say, you lay down, you've been shot, you're dead. And now the private's in charge. It's almost like they are taught to do it. They thrive on it. But if the private understands the vision of the overall operation, we can continue on, right? The Army goes rolling along. So it's the same thing, I think, and whatever your organization is, understanding that end state, understanding that vision, understanding the direction the organization is going in, lets you make sure your efforts are in line with that vision.
Yeah, you couldn't explain it better.
My mic's too heavy to drop.
You're gonna drop that bad boy. Yeah, don't do that. It's also not. It's not cheap either. You don't want to have to replace it. Your wife would be very upset with you. She would definitely communicate her vision.
Extreme violence.
Extreme violence with extreme violence. Now, hey man, you're exactly correct, right? When you hit upon the whole the dissecting the mission down to the most junior individual within the organization. Hey, there's Patton.
She made it.
Yeah. You think about that, right? She is just going off. But so let's think about that most junior individual, they're being told X, Y, and Z. So I thought about this recently, Ed. We get the discussion post going on for school in my department. So we do discussion posts just like a regular college. A lot of the stuff we do is just like college. All right. A little bit different, but still very much. I did a post about training and because that's what we had to talk about. And a buddy of mine lives down the street. He's in my class. He replies back, he liked this, blah, blah, blah. What do you think about Arctic training? To look at adversaries, to fight our adversaries who could possibly attack in the Arctic. And I thought, the first thing I thought of, Ed, one was crossing the Delaware. That's right. Boom. It came into my head like, wow. Right. How do we measure up to that? How do we train for that? Second thing that came up to my mind was, what does Joe think when they're out there doing Arctic training? What are they thinking? I'm cold. Yeah. Why are we doing it? This is a waste of time. You know what I'm saying? Like all those negatives, those but sirs, they're coming into play. And you're like, And you as the leader, you want to join them and say, nah, yeah, you know what? Forget this. You know what I mean? Like you actually, inside. However, you also know like what is required of me. I'm to lead these people through this tough time and to help them to see why we're doing it.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm to lead these people through a tough time and help them see. If you take that same concept and you apply that to any civilian organization, any community service, you're a ball coach, you're leading some type of group. And if you can lead them through the difficulties by explaining them why we're doing what we're doing and help them visualize it, because we're going to get and be visible also through communication, constant communication, you're going to achieve what needs to be done. Are you still going to have naysayers? Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. But you know who I look for, man. This is, and I'll stand on my soapbox all day long. I will always look for my informal leaders, and I will, because they have the strongest power in my organization. I'm going to get them on my side. I'm going to have them ingrained in this concept. I'm going to help them realize how important they are to getting the mission done. And I'm telling you, then you step back and you watch them go to work. That's why I don't know, man. People say, "Hey, man, why are you still in?" I'm at 23, and you're the same as me. You're at 24 now. Yeah, you're slightly more. They're like, "Wait, why did you retire at 20?" I don't know. Yeah, I do. I know. I love it too much. I enjoy it.
Yeah,
right.
That's it.
They have to kick me. They're gonna have to kick me out at 30. My wife's, I mean, that's not that far away. Don't get me wrong.
Maybe.
It's about 6 years down the road.
Maybe.
Yeah, we'll see. It will probably happen. But
total rabbit hole. But you and I talked about it. I used to ask the bearded ninja, like, how do you know you're ready to retire? And I just woke up one day and I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready to retire. I'm ready to be done. So you never know. In the next 6 years, you may wake up, have that day, and you're like, yeah, I think I'm ready. So yeah, but you got to share that vision with your family.
Yeah, no, exactly. Hey, real quick, you brought it up. I'm waiting for the right time to do it, but not everybody can look like the bearded ninja. I'm gonna do it. I've got just the tools for it.
Yeah,
and then we'll see what happens. I don't want to waste this beard. You know what I mean? I'm like, I need the right moment to do it. So maybe it'll be a day where we can just set something up and we can call him. Because we can call him through the roadcaster here. It'll be awesome.
If we're still recording in 2 years, I'll be working on growing my bearded ninja. I'm going to get my snake oil and grow
your own inner bearded ninja.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, hey, absolutely. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on. But
get back on track.
We got to get back on track. Hey, those of you listening or watching on YouTube, it doesn't matter. If you don't enjoy the banter every once in a while and the ridiculousness of us, I'm sorry. It's just sometimes it's fun, and especially when Ed and I we only get together once a week now. I mean, in a sense, and to be able to talk and just jab back and forth is fun. And obviously, we show an immense attraction to George Washington and history. So there's that. All right, so here we go. I'm going to read this. This is more from the narrative before we get into our point number 4 of be visible. After a mighty struggle that Henry Knox, one of Washington's generals, described as being of almost infinite difficulty. Let me repeat that. He basically described as being of almost infinite difficulty. Like he is staring down the barrel of a 45. That's actually a song. So
that is a song.
Washington was able to get the men of his section across. The attack was now 3 hours behind schedule. Any chance of surprising the enemy seemed gone. Now, with only 1/3 of his men in enemy territory and with the river at his back, Washington again had to decide. Could he push his wet, cold, and tired soldiers to attack an enemy that had been comfortably installed in their warm homes all night? Or should he turn back and risk being caught and attacked on the river by the enemy? All right, so we're at this point. We're talking. He's across. He made it. His other two organizations did not.
It's gonna play
they
a
still
role
have
later.
to march. They still have to march too now. Like
Miles.
here we are.
Yeah.
We're 3 hours behind. And here's a quick point. I did some more research for that paper that I wrote. When people landed, there were some people that when they landed on the other side, they were like, "Oh, this is not good. We're not going to survive this. We're not, something's going to happen."
Yeah.
They took off. And you know where they went? They went straight there. They went straight there to tell the Hessian Army, "Hey, listen, we just came across with old George here.
Georgie's on his way."
And he's on his way, and he's got X, Y, and Z. So here we are. We're 3 hours behind. I got traitors tucking tail and running. And they're telling the enemy. Now the enemy knows we're on our way. Excuse me. Goodness. So here we go. Number 4 of leadership lessons here. A Continental soldier's diary recounts that for every mile he covered, General Washington probably covered 12, riding back and forth, checking on the front line, then crossing the creek to check on the men at the back of the line. Then back to the front again. The soldiers knew their leader was invested and that he was fighting right beside their side. A good rule of thumb for leaders: the tougher the mission, the higher the visibility. Here we go. So here we are. You have to, let's say, incorporate a change in your organization. And this change is massive. This is not the time to sit at your desk. This is not the time to hide behind your computer screen. This is not the time to play armchair quarterback. This is the time to do what Ed and I talk about all the time: battlefield circulation. Yeah. Get out there constantly. If you got to check your emails, do that before everybody shows up to work. Do it after everybody leaves, right? You're trying to instill confidence, one, in your ability to lead. Also, two, that you are invested in this important movement. And if you think about it, I mean, obviously George Washington wasn't checking his email, but he wasn't like huddled up inside some tent waiting for people to show up with a fire. He was out there on horseback. By the way, if there's a book called Leadership Lessons on George Washington, I listened to the audio book, and I've also got the hard book. We
also started doing episodes on it.
we did.
Yeah.
But I've completed the book. However, he is one heck of a horseman. And that's something to be prideful back then, right? Like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
If you could ride a horse the way he did, like, you were a superstar in society. So he's back and forth on this horse. He's going through a creek with a horse. And you think about it, that horse's legs are probably exhausted by the time they're done.
Yeah.
Right. And frozen, because he's going through a creek that's frozen over, kind of, sort of, but isn't. It's still moving. And with that, he's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. He's constantly showing a presence. He's constantly showing how important this mission is. He's talking to his soldiers. He's motivating his soldiers. He's there for the, what I mean? He wasn't hiding out. And that's the whole point is,
no,
if it's important to you, it can be important to them. But here, you can't make it important about you. That's the key thing. I look at that, Ed. Where do you go with it?
Yeah. So, this is also a thing. This is, and it's probably in the leadership lessons of Washington, I believe. This is a thing for him. So in the battle, I believe it was the Battle of Cowpens. I may be mistaken on the battle, but the British and the Hessians are beating the Continental Army back.
Yeah, that is.
And they start this mass retreat. But Washington is headed to the front, and he goes, "Hey, you soldier, where are you going?" And they're like, "Sir, we're falling back." And he's like, "No, you're not." And he starts pushing them back to the front, because, I mean, here he is. This is the senior guy in our whole command, and here he is headed to the front. And if he can do it, I can do it. He wasn't no young fella at this point. And so being visible is very important to George Washington. And for us, Brian, I mean, you can't be an absentee leader.
No.
You can't. Because the soldiers notice.
Yeah.
The soldiers 100% notice. When you're not around, they notice.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be there. You got to be at the front. That's the reason that every morning when you have a formation for physical training, that's why you, the first sergeant, that's why you're up
Yes.
front.
Yes.
That's why you're up front. You're being seen. And when you're not there, you know what happens? Where's first sergeant at? Where's first sergeant? Is he on leave? Where's the first sergeant? It's a concern that you're not up
Mm-hmm.
front because that's where you belong, up
Yep.
front. So I think that's why formations are the way they are. Maybe they're not. They are to me. So in the rules of formation, according to me, you're at the front because that's where you're supposed to be. And I should miss you when you're not up there.
No, hey, man, you hit the nail on the head. It's funny. Throughout my career thus far, you meet those leaders who are capable and competent, but they're not committed. And sometimes, how do you know this? I can tell you for sure. One is like, are you out there actually doing physical training when other soldiers are out there doing it? Because if you show you're doing it while they're doing it, they're going to know how committed you are. All right. And that's just for soldiers, right? We went through the COVID crisis. And one of the things like me and my commander did, we worked out every single day together, every single day, unless he had to go do something with the other officers. We were together and we were working out. However, because of the restrictions, we weren't allowed to like do it in certain areas. So what we did is we work at my gym or we work at his gym back and forth. And then, we do a couple other things here and there. But the fact is we constantly did it. And then, well, how do you involve the soldiers? One of the ways we did, I came up with this. It was a first sergeant challenge. Every week we had a first sergeant challenge. The kids that listen that were part of the organization, then they can probably test to this. But what it was is I would do a workout or I would do something, and then I would put it on a whiteboard that anybody could see. Hey, if you can beat my time, or you can beat this, or you can beat that, then you earn my parking spot. It only happened like once, however. The commander, because he was a little younger than I am, and he was faster, right? I'm older, man. I mean, come on. I'm about endurance for the long haul, not for speed.
Yeah.
But he would beat me on things like just getting time or whatever, and he'd be like, "Man, I can't park on two spots at once." I'm like, "Well, then don't. Once you put your parking spot up for grabs too." But it's the idea. It's the idea that you're finding ways to show your commitment. It's ideas of showing what you talked about. How am I showing that I'm out front doing what I need to do? How am I being visible? All day long, battlefield circulation will do it. And it's not to do a battlefield circulation to constantly see what's going wrong. Hey, how about you get out there and you catch people doing something right? Right. That's I've heard it multiple times before. I want to see Simon talks about it and he references someone. But how are you going to catch people doing what is right?
Yeah.
And it's
I like that.
When you switch that mindset, when you switch that frame of thought, you're no longer that pessimist. You're more like an optimist in the idea that, hey, what is right? What does right look like? And then when you see it, you make sure everybody else knows that somebody's doing something right. Hey, hey, everybody, I just want to say, hey, I want to say thank you to Snuffy over here. I've done this X amount of years, and to see him do X, Y, and Z, that is amazing. And thank them for it. And I'm telling you what, that kind of visibility, that will earn you respect. And it'll earn you what do you tell me? Pay the bill for leadership capital?
Yeah.
That's paying that bill, buddy.
Get a little capital. It's nothing wrong with that.
We're going to move on to the final point, and you're going to cover that. But before we do that, I'm going to read this real quick. It's one last thing when we talk about pushing it forward. After the battle, Washington would explain his decision in a letter to John Hancock. In it, he wrote, "I well knew we could not reach it, Trenton, before day was fairly broke. But as I was certain there was no making a retreat without being discovered and harassed on repassing the river, I determined to push on at all events. Washington would drive forward for victory or death. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Not only were his life and the lives of his men in the balance, but also the fate of the revolution. Ultimately, the attack proved a resounding success. Against all odds, as the weather continued to worsen, Washington successfully marched his men, horses, guns, and wagons to Trenton. After gaining the east bank of the Delaware River, the courageous freezing army marched over 9 miles to the Hessian camp at Trenton. So they crossed this river, freezing blocks of ice everywhere, the sleet coming out, snow, freezing them. And now that they're crossed, hey, by the way, now we could do a 9-mile ruck march.
Then we're going to fight.
We get it. Yeah. And we're not talking, let me hit this real quick and then we'll go further with this. Washington himself rode up and down the column of men, exhorting them to press on. There, they defeated the German mercenaries and won a huge psychological victory. Victory. That is big, man. Like, to know what's going on. We got to think about this. You're going to get into leaders aren't called to do their best. That's what you're going to get into. But let's think about this. They're losing and losing and losing and losing. This battle right here, I would guarantee it set the tone for the rest of the revolution. This is the one that I think completely changed the revolution, because you think what happened next. So they take Trenton. They kind of give Trenton back, okay, because they had to pull back a little bit. They take Trenton again. And then where do they go next? Now they take Princeton. They're winning. They get 3 solid wins in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, that's solid. And then it just turns into a snowball effect. All right, Ed, give us what you got on this. Leaders aren't called to do their best.
All right. So leaders aren't called to do their best. Washington knew this leadership secret better than anyone. He knew that most of his men's enlistments expired in a week and that he was outmanned and outgunned. He knew their only chance of survival was to attack and win at Trenton. Everything else was irrelevant. It didn't matter. It did not matter that the river was filled with ice or that half the men had no shoes and hadn't eaten in days. That's those but sirs. The boat boarding passcode that night was victory or death. This is what Washington believed, and it was how he led his army. He knew that as leaders, we are not called to do our best. We are called to do what is required. Not called to do our best. We are called to do what is required. I mean, he understood the importance of this. He understood, like we talked about a couple of times already on the show, this is treason. If we lose, this is treason. That's death.
Yeah.
So he understood that, and so they just did. They did what they had to do. They overcome the but sirs because they had to. They had to get to the Hessian camp outside of Trenton. Oh no, it's going to be daylight when we get there. That doesn't matter. We got to get there. So he used his vision. He used he used his vision. He used all these things together to get there and to engage in this battle and to win this battle, like you said. So yeah, he has a small setback. So we talked about the two not crossing, the two elements not crossing, Colonel Caldwalter and General Ewing. That's why he crosses back. He wanted to go on the counterattack. He wanted to continue what he was, okay, so we did this thing. We met the Hessians at Trenton. Let's move on. Let's keep moving. But he couldn't because they didn't cross. So he does fall back and then come back again to Princeton and Trenton. So, but yeah, just doing what you got to do. I mean, we should understand. We understand that, not should. We do understand that as leaders. Like, there's things you could do, and maybe you could do them a different way, and you feel like that's the best. But is that what's needed now? So something to kind of keep in mind with you and within your organizations is I'm going to give my all to do what is necessary now.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm not going to be the star of the show by doing this thing. Maybe I'm not going to get all the spotlight on me by doing this thing, but the
Yeah.
spotlight might fall on this organization. It might fall on my successful army and not on Washington. You know, they're going to question Washington's wisdom in crossing that river and doing this 9-mile march. But you know what? The end state is my army went there and they performed. And I was there the whole way and they saw me there. And yeah. So what you got, Brian, about leaders aren't called to do their best?
Here we go. Real quick. I want to finish off this narrative because I think what it ends with, it's quite strong. And then before I get to that, I just want to, hey, I'm not trying to sell a book, but I can tell you right now, this book right here, it is a good one to understand what's going on. It's called George Washington on Leadership by Richard Brookshire. It's funny. My wife was in here dusting one day and she realized, she saw the top. Can you see the very top of my book there? The bookmark.
Yeah.
That's my bookmark. I like to use a dollar bill, with old George G Dub on the front. But this is a great book. If you want to really understand what was going on in that era, just the whole mindset of everything, this helped me. This really helped me out to really understand it. I've got another good George Washington and a Revolutionary War I want to get into later, but let me read this real quick. This is the final parts of the narrative. Washington's courage had won the day. His soldiers were destitute, cold, and exhausted, but he knew he had to motivate them and push on. His generals were inexperienced and demoralized, but he knew he had to inspire them. The weather was cold and the river treacherous, but he knew he had to navigate it. Everything seemed against Washington, but he knew he could act. To overcome seemingly impossible situations, you need courage. Washington, in his crossing of the Delaware, exemplified this virtue. The war would drag on for 7 more long and arduous years after finally in 1983, independence was secured. Without Washington's courageous decision to act decisively against the British at the moment of the greatest danger for the colony army, that may not have been the cause. All right, so here we go. Washington's army went on to win the Battle of Trenton and to win again at Princeton. The momentum of those wins turned the war in their favor, eventually leading to American independence 15 years later. And I believe the momentum truly began with the perseverance of one man, directing his forces to victory through a blinding snowstorm. Nearly 250 years later, actually we're over that now, General Washington's leadership lessons are as valuable today as they were the snowy night on the banks of the Delaware River. So let's think about this. Leaders aren't called to do their best. So all I'm calling on to you, Snuffy, is do your job. You determine if you do your best. I'm calling on, just do your job. That's what that's about. I need you to do your job. Yeah. You determine doing your best. And then your best will define who you are. Right? We don't go out and do physical feats because, hey, we have all these different glamorous things that are going to happen for us. You and I, Ed, we like cycling, running, lifting, stuff like that. You and I do these things because one, it fulfills something inside, right? It also psychologically helps us.
Yes.
But there's no one out there saying, hey, I need you to do a 5-mile run. Really. I mean, you think about it. There's no one. However, we're choosing to do that. And then how we do in that event or what we do during that event, that's on us. Do I decide to push myself a little bit harder? Give my best? That's up to me. When I'm called upon to fulfill a position, we've talked about this before. Actually, my previous commander, he hit me up and he's been listening. Thank goodness. He finally listened. He said he wouldn't listen to the show until I've already left the organization. I'm like, we could have had so much more better talks if you just listened to it while I was in the organization. Yeah. It was weird, but he has been listening, and he hit the episode when we talk about the imposter syndrome and we talk about being in, that feeling of being an imposter. He was recently selected to be the brigade XO. So he's going from a battalion XO, now he's going to become the brigade XO. And that's a big thing. Like, I told him, I said, you're destined to take on that darker, that silver oak leaf, and to take on a battalion. He said, nah, I won't do it. I said, nah, man, you're a good leader, bro. That's how I truly feel. Like, you very seldom meet those type of people. But he said he listened to that show and he truly felt the imposter syndrome. Well, let's think about this. You're called on to do a job. Only you can determine to do your best. Sometimes when you call on a job, you have that imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough. I don't know why I got selected. I don't think I can do this. You're telling yourself all these things. Why not just, I'm just going to do it. Just do it, man. And then when the times come, every time you get challenged, you step up to the plate, you knock it out of the park for a home run, and you move on to the next challenge. I concentrate on that challenge. Right. Meet that challenge and just say, hey, listen, I got it. I was called on to do a job, but I'm going to do my best. You don't have to say it to anyone. Say it to yourself. And I think that's key here. I mean, I wish sometimes you wish there was a way to kind of hear conversations with Washington, his generals, his soldiers, just to hear. I would love to have been able to hear his voice, hear how he motivated them. But at the same time, I wonder what was happening when he was on that horse by himself riding and he wasn't saying anything to somebody. What was he thinking? What was he saying to himself when he was coming up with this plan with his planners? What was he thinking in the moments? It's incredible. And I would challenge people to, hey, take on each job and do your best and just roll on with it, man. That's what I get from it.
Yeah, no, that was excellent, Brian. A very good point. I thought, and I mean, it's what you do. For me, if I have a job to do, I don't understand why I wouldn't do my best, right? I just don't understand. I mean, and it's a sense of my own personal pride, or I just feel like if I'm going to take the time to do this, then I may as well do it all the way. Like So that was excellent, man. This episode, I don't know, man. I like to listen to the first one, but we can't. And see, I thought this episode's gone very well today.
There's a reason why we had to record it 3 times. I don't think we were hitting the mark.
I did have a fun fact for you, though. So here's a fun fact. So we were talking earlier, I talked about Colonel Rahl, right? The leader of the Hessian soldiers in Trenton. So he dies from his wounds that he suffers during the fighting. So on December 26th or 7th, there's a little bit of question about the exact date. He dies, but he still gets court-martialed in January of 1977 after he's dead. And he was found guilty of neglecting to make preparations in case of retreat. So he was still criminally charged after his death. And then another key figure in all of this that I forgot to mention is we talked about how much Washington was retreating, but why wasn't he stopped? Why wasn't he destroyed? One, George Washington, historically, many, many, many historians will tell you he's one of the luckiest people that's ever lived. A lot of times he should have been caught and probably killed, given sentenced to death. But when he's doing all this retreating prior to the crossing of the Delaware, Cornwallis says, you know what? It's winter. I'm going to go back to New York. It's too cold for this nonsense. And he's not coming back. He's crossed the river. He ain't going to cross it again. And Cornwallis lets him go. And this is how we end up with this whole scenario of him saying, I'm going to be audacious. And I'm crossing that river because nobody thinks I'm going to cross that river. So it's just a couple of little fun facts that I know we didn't get to mention. And the other one is, so there is some questions about the losses at the fighting in Trenton, right? There are reports that no Americans died. But then there's also reports that 2 died in action and 2 froze to death. And that was all of General Washington's casualties. Yeah, he fights.
It's hard to believe.
Fights 1,200 Hessians, and the Hessians lose 106, either dead or wounded, in that same fight. And everybody else, George took prisoner. So now he's got a bigger crossing.
Did you want to, I know you know about the facts of things. Did you want to mention about what the thoughts were about the Haitians after this? Like what happened to them? What kind of happened to them?
I don't know. Why don't you enlighten me?
Oh, you did. Oh, okay. Maybe this is.
I'm not drawing a blank.
I can't remember. It was a conversation I had with you or somebody else. Anyway, so here's the deal. If you notice across the Midwest of America,
I know it now.
You'll notice that there are a lot of small towns across the Midwest, and it goes all the way from basically through Pennsylvania, Ohio, it comes all the way down to Texas, actually. And what happens is that a lot of people think these Haitians, they were like, you know what? Forget this. Let's just go take up some land, become farmers, and just live the life here. Yeah. It's way better. And so a lot of people believe that once this battle happened, those Haitians are like, forget you, British. Looks like they're gonna do well. We're gonna go take up settlement here in the States. And that's what they did. So
I mean, that was you and I. Yeah,
it was.
My memory a little bit. Yeah, I mean, this was a big event. Like for General Washington, this shows who huge. He is. It shows his actual genius as a military commander at this point. I mean, it shows how bold and or audacious he was to fight at Trenton. And what it does, like you said, it does reinvigorate the Continental Army. There's a few things, if you study the American Revolution, there's a few moments that I personally feel were huge points. So it's this one, and Baron von Steuben is the other one, when he arrives at Valley Forge and he starts actually drilling the Continental Army. And then I think that's the moment they become an army officially. But this is one of them. Washington here, and this is why his legend is so huge, right? Is because he keeps at this point, if he loses at Trenton, the revolution is probably over. Because now they've got a clear path already to Baltimore. They've already pushed everybody out of Philadelphia. If Washington stands in defeat, who's going to stop the British and the Hessians now? So it could be more crucial than we know, Brian.
I can't remember exactly where it is in this particular book, Washington, basically on leadership. However, there's a great deal of information talking about Baron von Steuben. So Washington had a choice, two different people. In the book, they talk about, he's like, you could choose to have this individual trying to train up your soldiers, or you could take this really crazy dude that we don't understand and no one understands because he doesn't speak English. And he goes, I want that guy. He doesn't speak English, but he knows what he's doing, and it's Baron von Steuben. So yeah, it's pretty impressive. But with that, okay, Ed, we're really like doing great on time. I'm surprised. I think that's what it was, because I think last time we recorded this, we were definitely over an hour and a half. So with that, we covered 5 leadership lessons on crossing the Delaware. People may think, man, this is what? Why would you cover this? Because it's critical to understand that whole scenario, one, as a soldier or as a business leader, right? To understand those leadership lessons could help you set yourself up for success. And that's the whole point, Ed. And we're going to cover more stuff like this. We're going to hit upon different wars, leadership lessons in different wars throughout American history. And I'm really excited about do some of these. Excuse me, goodness, but where we go with this, I'd like to hear from the listeners, Ed. I'd like to hear from the listeners about what they thought. Well, and I'm hoping that I could get this from you, but I want to hear this. Is what I want to hear from them about. I want to hear about what they think about this particular scenario, those lessons, and is there something else we can gain from that particular scenario to learn from? And if somebody could give us that, that's the whole point, is learning from each other. But Ed, if we wanted people to learn from each other and to tell us about this stuff, is there something that we can do, or we can go, or we can type things, like use the alphabet, stuff like that?
One moment, Brian.
I'm hoping that's not what I think it is.
It's water.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yes, Brian, there is. As a matter of fact, our listeners can go check us out on all social media platforms at 101 Influence on the Facebook page. It is a closed Facebook page. There's some simple questions. If I answer them, you can answer them too. Go in there, answer your question. One of our team is waiting to approve your access. Go in there. Get involved. You can also find us on the gram at 101 Influence, Brian, and you can interact with us there. Both of us check that pretty frequently. And then, Brian, there's the YouTube. Our listeners can find us on YouTube. They can see the faces. They can watch some of the faces that we make when one of us says something crazy. They can see me scratch my ear 15 times during the episode. Go to the Instinctive Influencers YouTube page, subscribe, give a big thumbs up, and then add some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future, what we could do better, what we do well already, if anything at all. And then we will welcome that kind of feedback. And as you know, if you have been listening to the show, feedback is crucial to our development.
Yes.
Cheers. It's
cheers
water.
to you, my friend. Yeah, well, mine's rain, so jalapeno strawberry, a little rough, but I'll pay $1. I'll pay $1.25 at the Dollar Tree. Yeah, hey man, like that's it. If we could just see more activity on that YouTube page, that's really where they get to actually kind of see like our feelings behind it, and understand it. But hey, thank you very much. I appreciate you wanting to go over this one more time, but I'm hoping this time, I hope it downloads just as good as last week's.
Oh man. But real quick, Brian, I did want to plug one book. I'm not selling a book either. So I've been using this book today. All right. And funny, this is The Real History of the American Revolution, a new look at the past. And what's interesting about this book, Brian, is it's by a man named Alan Axelrod. Do you recognize that name, Ryan?
I do.
You should, because he also wrote the Patent on Leadership book. And since we're talking about military and he's on leadership books, that should show you, if you're not military, shows you that there is a connection between what we're talking about and your organization. So I encourage you to check out this book or anything else. Alan Axelrod is actually one of my favorite historians to read. So check it out. But I just wanted to make sure people knew what I was using today as well, Brian. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hey, so for those of you who are regular listeners, or you're just coming in for the first time, we're going to start. I'm looking at a few interviews to knock out here and there to try to kind of, break this up a little bit. So we're going to go back and forth, but we're definitely going to be hitting upon leadership lessons. If there is a leadership lesson that you feel like would be a great topic to cover, shoot us a message. You can send it privately. You can send it through our Facebook page or whatever. Just let us know, because we'd love to cover it. Because there's nothing like looking at previous examples to help us for the future, right? Ed, you got anything else for the group?
No, I don't, Brian. Change could be another change of venue coming, but we'll make that. I'll make that announcement later.
Later on, I already know. I know the announcement. We're just we need to wait and see what my change of venue will be. Hopefully tomorrow I'll find out, and then maybe we'll make a big announcement together. Who knows?
I mean, sounds good to me, buddy.
Yeah, big announcement. All right. Well, hey, man, thank you so much. Totally just glad to be here with you guys. With that, I want to say I am Brian.
I am Ed.
And this has been the Instinctive Influencers podcast. So thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.
What's that look like?
Last week you wanted to wear a helmet.
Yeah.
This week you're trying to crack open a beverage.
It's LaCroix. It's fine. It's safe.